Tale of the Red Naga, Book 1. Written by Vincent Cerf. Narrated by Vincent Cerf. Chapter 1. The etheric pull of the soul well was putting audible strain on the psi drive. Yale could feel the tug of the well himself, as any living thing would. Even the plants in the hydroponics bays were groaning louder than usual through the audio conditioner. Luckily, this time, he didn't have any unbound spirit passengers, or they would have slipped right through the hull if they weren't paying attention. That only needs to happen once before you lose your spirit trafficking license. Yale pushed the psi drive harder to get out of the anomaly's active zone, zipping through the region with sufficient velocity to get to clear space. He checked the anomaly map for the area. It showed clear for at least one AU in every direction. How could that be?
"Are we out?"
inquired the light, ghostly, vibrating voice of the ship's artificial soul. It had temporarily placed itself into a locking phase to prevent disruption to a more delicate process it had been running in its mind stream. "Yeah, we're clear, honey. Sorry about that. It's my fault in the end. I just hadn't expected there to be one of those damn soul wells in this sector. The map was clear. It wasn't supposed to be there," Yale lamented. The anomaly map had never been wrong for such an overt, subtle object like a soul well. The only times he'd seen the map display incorrectly was when someone had run a large cloak over an anomaly, or if there was a psychic jammer in the area. Psychic jammers were not so subtle, given that they crank up tinnitus loud enough that it sounds like someone is whistling in your ears. And you can't cloak a soul well, since it would swallow the cloak.
"Always watch where you're going. Did you get distracted?"
the ghostly voice asked. Yale paused and sighed before answering. Yeah, I was thinking about Fury again."
"I told you to forget about that,"
snapped the ghostly voice. I know. It's just hard to forget what happened back there."
"Yale, darling, I understand that being organic, it is difficult to suppress traumatic memories. But you are aware of the means to correct such issues."
The voice softened.
"That said, I do occasionally remember those events myself, and while I find myself disturbed by their interruptions, I have maintained diligence in keeping myself on important tasks. Did you notice the shields flicker or the atmosphere thin at all? You have not, because that did not occur, as I have maintained diligence despite my own disturbances."
Yale already felt embarrassed enough for having slipped at all, and this was further amplified by being chastised by his ship. He knew his relationship with the ship soul was closer than most. In fact, most ships were running systems via an AI or biocomputer, which were putting the classic brain plug piloting out of style. The means of using a natural or artificial soul to manage ship systems was probably running on about 10% of ships these days. But most shipyards kept systems to maintain and service ensouled ships. A few did not, but the ones that did not were usually also deficient in many other ways. The shipyards run in a few sectors subject to radical fundamentalist anti-spirit religious organizations, considered to be the most insane of cults given the obvious evidence surrounding everyone in this wild universe, would often deny docking to ensouled ships.
"Did you get distracted again?"
the ship's soul asked, the voice vibrating softly in the interior of the bridge. No. I was just thinking about where we should go to port next," Yale half fibbed. This was only partially true, as he knew there weren't any shipyards run by the empty skulls anywhere nearby, so being denied docking wasn't so much of a concern. "I would like to have a full diagnostic run on the sensors and mapping system. That soul well should have been on the map, for one, and for two, the sensors should have picked it up if no one else had marked it." A thought occurred to Yale. "Wait, shouldn't you have sensed it?"
"Now that I consider it, I had felt a slight subtle disturbance, but—"
The voice paused, and Yale picked up on a sense of embarrassment in the air, knowing that the ship's soul was about to say,
"I was a bit
distracted,
focused on my project."
aka distracted. Yale smirked, feeling the type of odd satisfaction that one might feel when a guilty party has accused you of that which they themselves are guilty.
"Ah, so you were focused? I was focused?" the voice emphasized. "Don't look so pleased with yourself, Yale."
He couldn't quite get his features to shift entirely to a neutral expression. Okay, all right. Focused. Well, remember, always watch where I'm going, honey. He smiled and let out a puff of air resembling a chuckle. He perceived that feeling one gets when someone squints at them. A quality ship soul does not require camera feeds for the interior of the ship, and Chaya was quality.
Yale, darling, we are being watched.
That right there was one of the top benefits of an ensouled ship. They could always tell when someone was watching. Any idea what's looking at us? Yale asked as he checked sensors. No objects reading in the local vicinity. Cloaked vessel?
Several sets of eyes, all in one place. No ill intent. Cautious. Living. Curious?
Chaya paused as she analyzed the impression. Yale felt the weight of her thoughts as she considered the threat potential.
They do not feel human, too detached. Or at least not fully human, but that would be applying conscious interpretation on my part more so than definite impression.
This was supposed to be a standard ride through an empty sector. Now, a close call with a soul well and an unobserved extra party was cranking up the risk factor to higher levels than the gig was worth. He really didn't like it when voyeurs were eyeing his ship either. She's mine, back off, back off, back off, he thought loudly, hoping that the watcher would pick up that vibration and get moving along without causing any trouble. It's not that he wasn't curious what was going on, it's just that he knew investigating random anomalies had a higher than comfortable sudden discarnation rate.
You're making a strange face, Yale. Is that your thinking really hard face again?
Chaya, please. Let's get out of here before something weird happens. Yale pulled up the nav map to check how far off they were from their destination. They were set to deliver a dozen atmospheric regulators to a new colony 7 light-years away. The job listing had indicated that they needed rapid response, and his ship's psi drive could easily make the run in less than an hour without even pushing the drive. He'd picked up the regulators at the last station and was making good time before this whole interruption with the soul well dragging his ship out of the FTL phase. He checked the time. It had already been half an hour since he left the station. Has it already been that long? Time to get moving.
Shifting phase for transit,
Chaya's voice echoed.
3, 2, 1.
And Yale again felt the airy and dreamish sensation of being shifted toward the higher dimensional state, and then the psychokinetic pressure of being moved at superluminal velocity. He watched the stars on the viewer slowly shifting position, and then directed his attention to the target destination. He kept his hands on the drive controls in case there was another anomaly that might mandate taking manual operations once more. Visually, it appeared clear all the way to the destination, but soul wells are practically invisible until you're about a light-year off. If you're watching, this is more than enough time to navigate out of the way, which is why passing through one with vulnerable passengers is a serious negligent infraction. He chided himself again, then refocused and checked the nav panel. Current velocity, 15 light-years per hour. An easy-going pace for the Red Naga. Let's kick it up to 20, Chaya. He felt the psychokinetic pressure rise as she responded, and watched the nav panel's velocity rise accordingly. Perfect.
All systems normal. No subtle disturbances in my perception.
Chaya relayed calmly, which in the metaphasic state sounded perfectly clear. Chapter 2. The rest of the trip passed without issue, arriving in the Oilio system and locating the new colony on Oilio 4, the only planet in this system's habitable zone. They pulled into orbit.
Yale, darling, we are being watched,
reported Chaya. That was quick. They must be antsy for their regulators and had their eyes open. Any read on who and how they spotted us that fast?
Planet-side observers, numerous, anxious. Incoming comm transmission, laser carrier wave.
Angle us for optimum transmission, he commanded, and felt the ship rotate slightly. Yale tapped the accept button on the comm panel. A hollow image of a number of faces crowding around the call screen appeared, projected in front of him with clarity. They definitely matched the anxious qualifier. Call sign? Their apparent leader quickly inquired. Red Naga 1, reported Yale. Come down quick, Red Naga. We've got to get those regulators running quick. What took you so long? Chaya, pull us down to their landing pad, he commanded, and felt his ship start shifting down through the atmosphere. Sorry about the delay. Got scuffed by an unmarked soul well on the way over a few lights back that dropped us. Never mind, that was rhetorical. Make it quick. Drop to pad 1 and we'll meet you there. Despite being in the habitable zone, the surface of Oilio 4 was not especially habitable. There was an unpleasant lack of oxygen and a fatally high level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and no biosphere to speak of. As the Red Naga was shifting towards the landing pad, he could see the beginnings of the colony's biological terraforming operation, a series of domes containing saplings, grasses, and other vegetation. They were using a two-prong approach, it seemed, as he could see stacks of black carbon cubes on the southern side of the colony, lined up outside the sealed habitation domes. The Red Naga extended its docking pads and landed in the open landing bay, which closed and sealed. Yale noticed there was no atmospheric cycling, as the atmosphere outside the ship did not shift into a breathable state. The regulator situation must be really bad if they can't cycle the atmosphere in their own bays, Yale thought. He got up and walked from the bridge down the central hall, took the lift down to the landing bay, and put on a sealed rebreather helmet from the suit storage. Chaya, please open the landing ramp. I hope these colonists have an airlock into their landing bay, because if they don't, they're going to get a bit lightheaded. It was bad practice to not have full airlocks between a sealed landing bay and primary interiors. Still, you never know where someone will cheap out on something important and try to get by just using the bay door and one internal door as the only airlock, and only cycle the atmosphere in the landing bay. Incoming comm transmission, colony wireless. Yale heard Chaya's warbled voice over the helmet's comm. Patch 'em through for me, honey, he said, and loaded the first atmospheric regulator pallet onto the hoverlift and began pushing it down the open landing ramp into the dim light of the landing bay. Yale looked up at the bay's lights to see that only half of them were powered on. The comm link clicked on to the colony's connection. So listen, Captain, our inner airlock is kinda jammed, stated the wavering voice on the other end. Okay, exactly what do you want me to do about that? Do you have rebreathers or suits? I hope you're ready to hold your breath if you don't. You might be okay if you have enough atmosphere in your colony to... We really are running a bit dry on good air here already, man. That's why we put out a rapid call for Atmos and gave you the contract. Yours was the only ghoster within 60 lights. Right, but you only asked for Atmos. Please tell me that you have rebreathers or suits. Also, please tell me your power isn't totally scratched. Half your lights are off, Yale said to the possibly screwed colonist. He pushed the atmospheric regulator pallet to the sealed side of the airlock door. Damn, wait, they should... Hold on for a second here. They can't fix a jammed airlock? They're setting up a whole colony, and they can't fix their own jammed airlock? Yale pondered. They would have to be seriously lacking very important faculties for that to be the case. Our power is fine, mostly. We... started the colonist. What's wrong with your engineering capacity? Yale demanded. A sealed and actively terraforming colony cannot get along without engineers, mechanics, tools, and power. The half-lit bay and jammed airlock, on top of sudden demands for new atmospheric regulators, could easily be the festering boils emerging from the skin of a deeply diseased animal. Okay, just... stammered the colonist on the line. Okay, listen, interrupted Yale. How many people do you have? I have 24 rebreathers. Yale generally kept a maximum passenger capacity of 20 air breathers per ride, keeping the rebreathers on hand for emergencies like hull punctures. He'd never had a hull punch, but space isn't exactly danger-free, and he wasn't enthusiastic about becoming a solid-state organism at this point in his life. We've got 60 people here. How fast do you think you can get more? Stuttered the colonist. That was actually not too many to fit into his ship. Would be a bit tight, though. Why so few? Actually, hold on that. Get everyone lined up and ready to get in my ship. We'll get your engineers fitted with rebreathers inside, then we'll get your regulators up and running. Just hold... In your ship? Suddenly shouted the colonist. Yale cringed at the sudden spike in volume blasting into his ears. He finished unloading the pallet and ran the hoverlift back up the ship's landing bay for the next one. Yes, damn it, that's what I said. My ship's atmospheric regulation is functioning just fine, unlike yours. Yale was already more than annoyed with the inordinate levels of incompetence. If they were going to fight him on this...
But it's a ghoster!
The colonist cried. Ghoster, slang for an ensouled ship running as a courier or passenger ferry. Sometimes positive, sometimes derogatory. Positive when they need you, derogatory when superstitions kick in. To be fair, superstitions were not always entirely unfounded.
And? Would you rather you yourselves become ghosts in your air-free colony? But, oh God, the
colonist stammered a bit more before moving away from his comm to relay the plan to the other colonists. Yale heard some muffled shouting from both behind the airlock and over the comlink, but he couldn't make heads or tails of their democratic process quite yet. He floated the second pallet down onto the landing bay as he tried to parse their audio. Yale smirked and shook his head as he overheard a few pieces of the argument, shouting about souls, the words unclean and cursed, and space demons. He hover-lifted the third regulator down the landing ramp and let it down next to the other two. Hey, anyone on the line? I have a suggestion that might lubricate this situation, he called over the link. Some shouts that might have been shut up peeked over the rest of the muffled chatter, and he heard the original colonist pick up the line. What is it? How about those of you who have the balls to get on my ship do, and the ones who lack even a drop of courage can slap on a rebreather before they choke out? There was a pause on the line. Oh, okay, hold please. Yale heard the colonists' muffled relaying of the suggestion. Should these people even stay here? If their engineering is scratched, maybe they need to be lifted to a nearby station until they can get reoriented and resupplied. Yale considered the annoyance of ferrying a pack of unruly space hicks to... where would it be? Straight back to Zuro? Fourth regulator lifted, back down the ramp. 8 more to go. The comlink clicked as the colonist came back. We are of the opinion that... First, Yale interrupted. Sorry, but do you actually have a plan on surviving here, right now? He knew that he might come off as the typical asshole spacer, but if they were short on time, they needed to get this sorted. You might need to be lifted to another station. No, we'll take your first deal, spouted the colonist hurriedly. Yale had the odd impression that there might be a bit more there than a fear of ghosters. You'll all get on the ship? He was a bit surprised at this. What? Oh, no, the other deal, with the rebreathers, specified the colonist. Very well. I'll need a few minutes to finish getting the Atmos out, and I'll prep the rebreathers so you can get them on. You all sort out who's staying in the ship. Get your engineers ready if you still have any. You do have at least a few people who can install these Atmos, right? Well, it's not that hard to put a new Atmo in, is it? Yale stopped and threw his arms in the air, clenching his jaw and fists, nearly growling as he processed this. His first suspicion was right. He knew it. He fucking knew it. Fucking hell. They haven't got any damn engineers. They're completely fucked. Put an engineer on the line. This was the make-or-break moment for this colony, if there's not even one. Sorry, our engineering team went on strike and they broke a few things when they left after we didn't give them what they wanted. The voice on the line sounded defeated. And you really believed you could make it just by calling me in with only a dozen Atmos? Yale's voice carried his frustration. They needed off this rock. There was no other solution. Yale had engineering skills, but they were oriented around maintaining his ship, not installing colony subsystems. It would take too long to figure out their systems and software, not to mention fixing any other surprise sabotage they would discover on the way. Fifth Atmo delivered into the bay. Okay, I know it sounds bad, but we didn't want to give up on our colony, you know? Yale sighed. Sentimental value. One of the most common complicating factors in life. He had empathy for the victims of sentimental value, being one himself. Sometimes you have to choose between losses and lives. You'll have a chance to come back after you get yourselves sorted, but I'm going to have to get you off planet. I promise you that my ship won't eat your souls or curse you. No, but... The reality of the situation was hitting the poor colonist.
First they strike, then they smash, then everything's fried. Now we're going to have to hightail it on a ghoster.
Rough series of events. Yale loaded the 6th Atmo and floated it down into the bay. Well, let everyone know that they have to get ready. I'm about half done unloading the Atmos. You'll want to move quick, but don't rush since you'll have to hold your breath. Yale heard the colonist relaying the situation to the rest of the concerned, who had a much more muted reaction compared to their previous uproar over his earlier suggestion. He wondered if that were an effect of emotional exhaustion or if it were the result of oxygen depletion. Hopefully, it was only the former. As Yale finished unloading the last Atmo into the bay, he clicked the comm back on. All ready, my door's open. Single or double file into my landing bay. First one's in, ride the lift or take the stairs up to the passenger quarters and mess hall. It'll be a tight fit. Do not dally. Everyone ready?
We're already here, Captain.
The colonist sounded depressed. It cannot be helped. Yale floated the hoverlift back into the Red Naga's cargo bay, slid it to the side, and flicked it off. Chaya, once their last man is in, close the landing ramp and cycle the atmosphere to fully breathable as fast as you can, he instructed his ship's soul.
Affirmative, darling. Ready for passengers.
Her voice warbled over the comlink. Yale rode the lift up into the first level and walked to the bridge to take his seat in the captain's chair, checking the nav map to confirm that there were no closer stations than Zuro. This region was considered rural in colony density terms. The next closest station was 30 light-years away. Zuro was only 10. Looks like it'll be Zuro. Ah well. He wasn't excited about flying past those voyeurs and mystery well. He decided to take a wide trajectory to avoid that potential hazard zone on his way back. With the destination keyed in, he was ready. All right, we're good to go. Take a deep breath, open up, and come on in. Yale watched on the viewer as the airlock door opened and saw the rush of colonists shuffle out into the landing bay, hearing their footsteps clattering up the cargo ramp into the lower section of the Red Naga. It was only about a 10-meter distance. He prayed that none of them would collapse on the way in. A few breaths of this much carbon dioxide would panic even the most hardened spacer. He flicked on the in-ship security feeds and watched the first ones shuffling into the lifts and up the stairs. At least they could follow instructions. Chaya, passenger count, please. He estimated about 40 were on board so far.
43 passengers. They feel scared, darling. 46, 50, 55, 59. Darling, one of the passengers has collected a rebreather from storage and left the cargo bay.
Chaya, close the ramp and cycle the atmosphere. Shouting suddenly poured out of the cargo bay.
Dear passengers, please remain calm.
Chaya's ghostly voice echoed throughout the ship. Yale flicked on the viewers for the area around the ship, locating the stubborn colonist. You should all be able to breathe easy now. There is room in the passenger compartments for many of you. If you are near the lift or stairwell, please follow the indicator lights. Disconcerted grumbling and a few raised voices, but the shouting died down. Yale looked closely at the colonist, who was attempting to lift and move one of the atmospheric regulator pallets. No hoverlift, not even an old-fashioned pallet jack. Just trying to deadlift the whole device. Poor guy's going to throw his back out, Yale remarked to himself. Chaya, honey, could you please patch me through to that vacuum head out there?
Patching R01 to R07,
came her ghostly voice, and he heard the rebreather's comm click. Excuse me, but what are you doing? He watched the colonist on the viewer jump, look around, shake his head, then look at the ship. I ain't riding in your ghoster. I'm going to fix the blasted regulators, and I'm going to stay right here. He stomped his foot on the bay floor. A vision of this colonist's future grave marker rose in Yale's mind. A granite slab laser engraved with the words, Cause of Death, Excessive Stubbornness Disorder. I highly recommend... Shut it, spook! Shouted the colonist, who Yale could see trying to smack the side of the rebreather helmet in a vain effort to disable the comlink. There was a tap switch below the right ear, but that could be overridden by Chaya easily. Yale sighed heavily, got up, and walked back out of the bridge towards the new passengers coming up the stairwell and out of the lift. A series of green lights directed the concerned and fearful colonists towards the open doorways. 20 individual passenger rooms lined the passageway leading to the canteen at the rear of the ship. The rooms were fairly small, but each featured a simple bed, a desk, a closet, and a VR link for entertainment. Most of the time, the voyages were quick enough that none of these were particularly necessary. But Yale wasn't about to sacrifice accommodations just because they weren't always used. He watched the colonists shuffling into the rooms. They were fairly disheveled looking, as if they hadn't been able to get any laundry done and hadn't been able to properly shower for a while. He was certain that if he didn't have his rebreather on, he'd be picking up their collective body odor. Yale motioned to one of the colonists, a younger woman. "Hey, question!" he called to her. She looked at him, then tried to look like she hadn't noticed him calling to her as she followed the flow of colonists and picked one of the rooms to slip into. Rude, he thought. He decided on the shotgun approach and shouted, "Attention! Attention!" Several of the startled colonists looked at him. "You!" He pointed directly at one of the colonists, an older male, who looked even more fearful than the woman he had previously addressed. "I apologize for the interruption, both on the general and specific scales. However, one of your people snagged a rebreather and is out there trying to lift an Atmo. Can you help me out in getting him back in?" The older man looked somewhat pleadingly at the other members of the colony. They mostly shrugged, and their collective body language simply foisted the responsibility back to him. He made a pained sound and looked back to Yale. Who is it?" the old man asked. "Couldn't tell you. Please step over here to the viewer and then you can tell me," Yale responded. He gestured to the bridge. The old man hesitatingly stepped over into the bridge and looked to the viewer Yale pointed toward. The man's face turned into a soured expression. "Oh, that's Zeddy," he stated. "If I open the comm to his rebreather, can you convince him to get back on the ship before he hurts himself?" Zeddy was trying to push the pallet towards the airlock door. The Atmo was just as obstinate as he was, and rejected the notion of sliding along the floor. "Well, I could try." "Chaya, please patch the bridge to R07, Yale requested. "Channel open, Captain." Chaya's voice emanated into the bridge, disturbing the older man. Yale gestured to him, then waved toward the image of Zeddy on the screen, who was increasingly tiring himself out with his impossible task. The old man appeared uncertain for a moment, then issued a resigned sigh before speaking. "Zeddy, it's Orin." Zeddy's labored breathing was audible over the comlink. Zeddy paused, his hands on the atmospheric regulator's crate. "Zed, give it up. You're not going to move that Atmo alone." "Well, Orin, maybe you could all come help me then," he said in an exasperated tone. "Can't believe you all went and got on that ghoster. How do I know you haven't had it suck your souls out already?" "If that were the case, Zed, then would you expect us to come out and carry that Atmo with you?" "Think for a sec, Zed. Let's get going, sooner than later, so we can regroup and come back with some new crew to fix this mess." Zeddy paused. He sighed and stood up, shoulders drooping. Inner agony, Yale estimated. "Orin, you know my wife is buried here. I can't just leave like this." "Damn it, Zed!" Orin shouted suddenly. Zeddy winced. "We've all lost someone here or there or somewhere, but we're alive now. Don't throw your life away here like a damn idiot over your wife's grave. Do you think she'd want you to suffocate here because you were too damn thick-headed to know when to get a move on?" Zeddy stood still for a few moments, then kicked the atmospheric regulator's crate and released a hissing, growling sigh. "You're always right, aren't you, Orin?" Zeddy spoke angrily, displaying his frustration. He paced around in the bay, then kicked the regulator again. "Fine! Fine!" he shouted. "Opening rear airlock," Chaya spoke, startling Orin. Yale watched one of the viewer panels displaying the opening airlock, which then extended its stairway down to the bay floor. He looked to the other viewer to see Zeddy looking at the airlock open, and watched Zeddy's defeated state as he stepped up the airway into the rear airlock. "Closing rear airlock, cycling atmosphere," Chaya echoed again. The viewer showed the rear door close, momentarily followed by the interior airlock opening. Zeddy was greeted by the stragglers still in the cargo bay, various discussion echoing up from the cargo bay through the stairwell. Orin looked at Yale. Is your ship, a girl?
Yale returned the gaze of Orin. Is that surprising? Orin seemed unsure of how to handle this information.
I always thought ghosters were neutral?
Yale looked at the view screens, looked around the interior of the bridge, then looked back to the passenger section. He turned back to Orin. You know, ships historically were gendered in a feminine way. She and her and all that. That was before ships could really be infused with a soul, which can be more masculine or more feminine by temperament and inclination. Some are intentionally raised to be more neutral, like the ones from the Silver Knight Academy, but I had Chaya made in the old-fashioned way, Yale explained. He sat back into the bridge chair. So, well, I had a choice in the matter. And I figured I didn't want to butt heads with my own ship, so I gave her a feminine inclination. Figured it'd be more natural that way. Orin seemed to be disconcerted at the way Yale used the term natural in the context of the otherwise unnatural creation of an entire soul for the purpose of ship system regulation. He tried to say something, but his thought process seemed to hitch. He took in a breath to say something, then paused. Finally, he got back onto a viable train of thought.
You know, we should get going, I think.
Of course. I've got us keyed for Zuro. Hey, do you happen to know the signal to get your roof's door to open? Yale tilted his head at Orin. Orin looked confused for a moment.
I, wasn't in charge of handling that, but I think... Let me ask around.
Orin walked out of the bridge and began asking the other colonists for the key detail. A moment to breathe. What a massive hassle, remarked Yale. It seems they were under-equipped, underprepared, and insufficiently capable of crisis management. Are we going to charge them for the trip? Chaya inquired. They may be underfunded as well. Yale considered the rate for 60 passengers over 10 light-years, plus skirting around the potential hazards encountered earlier, plus the additional difficulties of interfacing with disgruntled passengers. However, these people were not in a position to refuse. Unlike many others in the galaxy, Yale typically offered what he referred to as a duress discount of 50% off. He found that this typically prevented negative review accumulation. Chaya, do you think they have enough for a trip to Zuro, even with the duress discount? They had enough to start a colony, and enough for 12 atmospheric regulators with rapid delivery. However, if their engineering strike was overpay, it's possible they were using emergency funds or credit to call for the atmospheric regulator delivery. Might not be getting paid this time, I suppose. He sighed and leaned back. One of the passengers came forward into the bridge, a younger man with a short dark beard.
Hello? You need the bay door signal?
Yale looked back to see the concerned face. Yes, we've got to get on our way, and your door's closed. Right. Well, we always operated it from inside on the main panel. I don't know if there's a remote signal for it, and if there is one, well, only one of those engineers that bailed on us would know it. He looked worried for having to provide this information. Yale looked straight into the younger man's concerned eyes. He blinked a few times in disbelief. Yale looked back out the viewer for a few moments. He returned his gaze to the younger man. How bad would it be if we just side-grappled the door open? The younger man shrugged. I'm not really sure, he stated weakly. No engineers. Just something else broken for them to fix later anyway. Chaya, let's lift and pull that door open. Retracting gear, lifting, her voice echoed in the bridge. There was a shift in the psychic pressure in the bridge, and the ship tilted toward the ceiling of the large chamber. The colonist shivered at the change. Relax, breathe, try not to tense up, Yale instructed the colonist, who did his best to follow the directions and restore his composure. Chaya, Yale began. Cracking, she announced, seeming excited. Yale smiled, knowing he didn't need to say more, as a slight fizzing sound filled the air, and Chaya reached her presence out through the Red Naga's forward psi array into the door. The psi arrays hummed as she psychokinetically took hold of the metal door and pulled it open with loud grinding, cracking, and metal squealing, as the gears were pushed against their motors and seals tore. See? Totally fine, Yale said casually to the nearby colonist.
I'm not so sure, but, I'm really just tired of this stupid colony, so whatever. Yale was practically taken aback. Really? It seemed like you were all extremely attached to this place. The door was fully open, and Chaya released her hold on it. The Red Naga began floating forward, perpendicular to the planet's surface, the side drive lifting the ship into the atmosphere. The two watched the void of space draw near via the viewers, and the man replied to Yale's accusation. Oh, a lot of the folks here, sure, they'll want to come back. But I think I'll head coreward and maybe try my hand at star streaming or something. I only came along because they wanted a botanist for their terraforming project. Yale squinted his eyes at the colonist in the bridge. Star streaming? You know the only star streamers out there are running in ensouled ships, right? The Red Naga passed through a couple of thick clouds on the way into the upper atmosphere. Fizzy, noted Chaya. What? Said the colonist. Those clouds were carbonated, replied Chaya. I felt them fizzing against my hull as we passed through. I actually, he started. Do you want to zip them again, Chaya? If there's time, Captain. She referred to him as Captain around clients and other listeners, raised fewer questions that way, generated fewer negative vibes. We aren't technically on a schedule, but let's make it quick, said Yale. There was a subtle alteration in the psychokinetic pressure as Chaya flew back down and zipped through the thick cloud formations, flows of carbonated water vapor streaming behind them as her motions sewed the fluffy atmospheric phenomena together. Yale and the colonist both felt the emotion buzz in their nervous systems as a full-bodied, gentle, rushing, tingling sensation, somewhat like riding an ancient roller coaster through a phantasmic bubble bath. After punching a few holes in each of the nearest clouds, Chaya spiraled upward back out spaceward. Yale could feel the bubbling happiness vibrating in the air. The colonist took a breath and exhaled slowly to empty the unusual effect from his body. It took a few more breaths to get the rest. It's not always easy to ground yourself in space. Wow, that was really something, he stated out loud. Yale gave a nod and a smile to the colonist. Oh, she's something all right. I thought a ghoster would be more scary. Only when she's angry, Yale laughed. I personally think it's kind of cute, but everyone else pisses their pants. The former colonist appeared disconcerted. I've heard a lot of rumors about ghosters. Are any of them, true? Yale tilted his head back at the colonist. Listen, I'm a licensed professional, and so is Chaya. Rumors like what you're probably thinking about soul-sucking abominations are not started by licensed professionals. Not usually, anyway, thought Yale, but he kept that bit to himself. The nasty rumors out there are mostly caused or sourced to psycho-pirates, sicko-asteroid cultists, and the other lunatic void fuckers out there. Yale remembered Fury and shook his head. Not for me, no way. Yale sighed and looked at the still concerned bearded face. I am a professional, Yale attempted to assuage him. Do you know how nasty the karmic backlash would be for sucking the soul out of a client? The bearded man shook his head. Well, assuming I could escape any planetary authorities, I'd be stuck living with and working for pirates for the rest of my life, and maybe even some of my afterlife. I see, replied the colonist. Yeah. Yale focused on the viewers. Well, anyway, Zuro's the nearest station, so that's where we're going. There was an unmarked anomaly on the way here, so I've keyed in a trajectory around it. Chaya, please notify our passengers of imminent transit. The lights in the ship blinked, followed by Chaya's notification. Attention passengers, please take a seat as we phase for transit. Yale motioned for the colonist to sit down in the left seat. There were 3 seats on the bridge. The captain's chair at the center, and 2 seats on either side for operations personnel. As Chaya managed ship system regulation herself, these other 2 seats were vestigial holdovers from the Red Naga's past life as a lower-end luxury yacht, now only valuable for their views of the starry void. The colonist sat down in the open operations chair, and Chaya delayed a few more moments for the particularly slow colonists to orient themselves. Shifting phase for transit, Chaya's voice echoed throughout the ship.
3, 2, 1.
And the psi drive pushed the Red Naga into the multidimensional state. The psychokinetic pressure shifted as Chaya began transit towards Zuro. Following the arc Yale had keyed in, she brought up the speed to 20 light-years per hour.
Current destination, Zuro. Estimated time to arrival, 30 minutes.
Chaya's voice called through the ship, perfectly clear. There were a few slightly startled grumbles audible in the passenger compartments. Yale watched the points of starlight migrating slowly across the viewers and focused on their trajectory. He had a distinct sense that Chaya was paying close attention as well. The colonist tried to stand up, nearly wobbled out of the chair, then sat back down.
"It's, a bit weirder on a ghoster, isn't it?"
the colonist remarked. Yale's eyes continually scanned the viewers. "Yep. What type of ship did you ride over to the colony?" The colonist watched the view screens, trying to see whatever could be interesting about the slowly moving dots.
The founders specifically selected a plugger for their trip."
Yale half nodded. Well, some pilots can get pretty far out into the metaphasic. Not as far as a ship soul, though.
I admit, psionics and space travel were never really my area of study, but why can't pilots go out as far?
Yale glanced at the colonist, then returned to the viewer. That's a bit of a mix of a technical issue and a skill issue. Basically, when a pilot is plugged in, the ship feels a lot like a mechanical suit. To a ship soul, the ship is its body.
Let me be specific. A pilot can't go out as far into the metaphasic safely like a ship soul can.
Some of the spacehead pilots I knew went too far and slipped all the way out of reality. Whole ships and crews just zoop, gone.
Oh, can that happen to a ghoster?
Yale sighed, becoming a bit annoyed with the repeated distraction. Not on accident. It's like instinctual self-preservation keeps them from going too far. The colonist was quiet for a moment.
Has anyone ever... Captain, I can hear a distress call.
Chaya interrupted. Odd, this was a low-traffic area. Where's it coming from? Asked Yale.
Ahead of us, near the soul well we encountered earlier. Similar feeling as the Watchers.
Chaya stated plainly. Possibilities tore through Yale's mind. Pirates, mercenaries, system failure, bait, anomalies, worse. Please relay their call, Chaya, he requested.
Relaying. Help, please. If you can hear this, please help. Our drive snapped. The well is getting closer. Captain, their emitter must have run out of power.
Multiple system failure, Yale thought. He sighed heavily. A difficult position. He was already ferrying refugees. No telling what kind of luggage he might be picking up.
We must help them,
Chaya asserted. Yale was silent, considering the situation. It would be a pretty serious risk.
We will help them,
she stated, and there was a slight shift as she changed course toward the source of the distress call. Chaya! The psychokinetic tension rose slightly, causing a light buzzing sensation in his body. He looked at the velocity meter and saw that Chaya had brought their speed to 72 light-years per hour. Fast, and just on the edge of comfort. She could go faster, but it would strain untrained occupants.
Hold on! There's a soul well out there?
The colonist interrupted, catching up to the imminent situation. It's not out there right now. Look. Yale pulled up the anomaly map onto the left viewer. Chaya had placed a glowing X marker on the soul well, to be uploaded when they next reached port. It was still around 5 light-years away.
Wait, how could that be?
His brow contorted in a mixture of fear and concern, and he was trembling slightly from this level of psychic pressure in the metaphasic state.
There aren't any soul wells in this sector.
The map agreed with that, until... Yale expanded the map and set the filter to display only soul wells. I ran into one just over here, he said, pointing to the red hazardous anomaly indicator symbol that their ship was approaching. Besides that one, there were no other soul wells on the anomaly map within a 200 light-year radius. Yale looked back toward the main viewer. Their target was not yet visible. Chaya, how do you think we're going to pick them up? Yale asked. I'm not going to risk you getting too close to that damn well.
We will see when we get there, my captain, but we must try.
Hey, what about us?
The colonist looked between Yale and the viewers. He didn't seem quite sure where to fix his gaze when addressing Chaya, and settled on following Yale's attention to the main viewer.
Passenger safety is priority,
noted Chaya.
However, the web of interstellar responsibility demands response to distress signals.
Please go inform the rest of your people that we might have to bring the other ship's passengers on board if their ship is seriously damaged. Yale knew he only had a few moments to come up with a plan before they would be in range, but hit the wall of the unknown. He'd have to improvise. Should they try to get close enough to re-energize their systems? Did their drive just vent all their power, or is it wiped? Do they have any emergency escape pods? He figured that if their psi emitter ran out of power delivering a relatively simple message, then the snap must have drained all of their power out of their psi array and their drive. But whether or not they'd have conventional power to get them on the radio would depend on their ship's internal configuration. Some of them ran all psi these days. His ship had one EM-propelled tug drone. He'd normally have two, but hadn't had time to replace the one he lost in the incident at Fury. It would not be affected by the soul well to nearly the same degree, unless it was right at the center of it. So hopefully...
Arriving at destination, dropping into standard phase in 3, 2, 1...
And the dreamlike sensory effects of the metaphasic dissipated, with a feeling not unlike how one feels the return of gravity as a descending elevator comes to a halt.
"Captain, we're being watched,"
notified Chaya's now ghostly echoing tone. "Glad they can see us." Yale took note of the sensor display. The distressed ship was shaped like a long cylinder with 8 rectangular protrusions sticking out on each side symmetrically. It was mostly bare metal, as if the designers had elected a minimalistic aesthetic. No insignia, no external lights, no clear antennae, no windows. He wondered if the interior design matched the exterior, or if they just wanted to look as poor as possible to keep attention off of themselves. Yale shook the stray thoughts out of his head and refocused on the situation. The ship was drifting, slowly, towards the center of the soul well. It would probably take them about 40 minutes to reach the center at this rate, and luckily they were still fairly out near the edge of the effect radius. Far enough in to cause drive strain, but not so far as to be seriously irretrievable. The Red Naga was just outside the edge, and Yale could see the visual distortions on the display that indicated the well's presence about 50 kilometers away. "Chaya, can we get them on radio?" asked Yale.
"Hailing. Radio link established. Viewer active."
A hollow image opened up on the main viewer, showing what appeared to be a man with perfectly white skin and platinum blonde hair, well-chiseled features, with a taller-than-average face, and blue-green eyes. His motions seemed deliberate, yet somehow robotic, as if he was in perfect control of every motion. Yale wanted to think he was an android, but something didn't match. "Hail, Savior. We appreciate your coming to rescue us from an extraordinarily disruptive fate." His voice was a cool, warm, almost monotone. Most androids were designed to mimic natural human speech intonations. Not outside possibility, but Chaya had noted them as living before. "Hey, glad you've got radio. What are you doing out here?" Yale inquired. "Please, Captain, we will fully entail our journey to you when we are not under duress. Our drive psi matrix shattered. Please come to dock to our ship at the aft end and we will board," said the blond man with an intense calmness. There was some kind of weight in the man's speech that did not belong to a conventional android. "All right, but that'll put us in the effect zone. I'm deploying our electro-tug to keep your ship from getting any further out and see if it can pull you out first." Yale keyed the tug release from the right side panel. "Chaya, please instruct the tug to get them," he said, feeling an affirming sensation from her as he felt the vibration of the tug disconnecting from their ship. "Very well, Captain. However, you may only delay the descent if you're using a single electro-tug. You will have to come into the edge of the well to reach us in any case." Yale watched as the tug zipped through space to their unfortunate tube, maglock to the forend, and attempt to push them out of the effect radius. The display indicated that it had, indeed, only cut their velocity by about 40%. More time. "Chaya, we're going to have to go in. Can you handle it?"
Captain, could you take the controls? I don't want to lose what I have been working on." She seemed distressed. He wanted to see what her personal project was to see if it was worth the trouble, but she was keeping it a surprise. "All right. Lock and we'll go." "Thank you, Captain." Chaya pressed into a locking phase, closely pressing her spiritual matter into the ship's psi conduits, systems, and circuitry to avoid essence loss. Her presence in the bridge diminished. Yale tapped the in-ship communicator. "Everyone, we're on an additional emergency rescue operation. Please remain calm, and if any of you know grounding or centering practices, use them now." He started to hear a growing din along the interior of the ship as the ex-colonists began to experience rising levels of concern. Yale grabbed the manual controls as the colonist next to him appeared to have a small panic attack. "Relax, this is totally routine. It'll only feel weird," Yale said in an attempt to soothe the poor soul. It was not actually routine, but it'd be better if that wasn't said. "Oh, okay." The disconcerted individual took a breath and tried to steady himself as Yale pressed the drive towards the troubled vessel. As they began to enter the Solwell's radius, he started feeling the eerie tug, and the side drive started emitting a pressurized, straining hum. The living beings inside started making a bit more noise themselves as they started to feel the anomaly's effects. He pressed forward to the stranded vessel, reaching it quickly, and rotated the Red Naga around so that its rear docking port was facing the one belonging to the other ship and synchronized their velocities. He keyed the view screen to display the rear view, and then backed the ship to just nearly touching the other ship. He hit the ship's rear maglock activator, which extended locking servo arms that linked to the docking links of the other ship, pulling them closer. He flipped on the rear atmospheric sealing force bubble, opened the rear dock door, and hit the pressure equalizer. The space between the two ships that wasn't explicitly sealed by solid steel was filled with a psi-shielded bubble of breathable air. Yale looked to the holoviewer and saw that the man had left the view's visible area. "Hey in there! We're ready to bring you in! Open up and hurry along!" Yale shouted, hoping they would hear him from wherever they had gone off to. A queasy minute passed as they waited for the other vessel to open up. He was about to shout again when he saw the other ship's docking door open up, and 7 tall figures, similar in make and build to the initial speaker, stepped through into the airlock. One of them looked up and said, "We are all in. Complete the process, Captain." Yale noticed that one of them was carrying what appeared to be a briefcase, and another was carrying a box, but the rest had no other luggage. He closed the rear airlock door, deactivated the maglocks, flipped off the atmosphere bubble field, and then pushed the side drive directly towards the nearest clear space. Then, as they were at the very edge of the effect field, there was a sudden rise in psychoetheric tension, somewhat like suddenly being hit with a cold ocean wave while laying on a lovely warm beach. Cool, tingling, vibrating sensations crawled over his body like 1,000 tiny spiders. The side drive wailed, the passengers gave out startled shouts, and he heard Chaya emit an echoing strangled noise. Something weird had just happened. The sensations lasted only about 4 seconds, and at the end of it they'd reached the outside of the Solwell's radius. Yale shook his head and shuddered. He looked to the colonist next to him, who appeared to be frozen with fear for a moment or two before his tension released and he looked around slowly. "Are we out?" he asked, trembling slightly as he ran his hands along his arms and over his face to confirm that he was still alive. Yale hit the inner airlock to let the new passengers in. He had questions for them. "Yeah, we're out, but... Chaya, are you all right?" The sensation of Chaya's presence began to return to the cockpit, but carried an odd vibe with it. "Captain, I'm all right. But the burst pulled me halfway out of lock, and..." The cockpit filled with a strange warmth, a feeling reminiscent of how one feels after crying for a while, but spread out in a full-bodied way. "I almost lost it, Captain. I kept it, but it tore. It was almost complete." "Oh no. Can you fix it, Chaya?" Yale asked.
It was rare for her to give off this type of emotion. She must really care about this project.
I will have to. I'm sorry. I should be glad that we're all right.
The emotion load of her psychic presence receded, and she retook control, directing the ship further away from the anomaly.
Captain, please address the passengers and let them know we'll be en route to Zuro shortly. I will bring us back into phase for transit in 5 minutes.
A depressed calmness filled the cockpit. It'll be all right, Chaya, Yale said reassuringly. He got up and stepped around to check on the passenger quarters. Some of the colonists had come out into the hall from the rooms lining the passageway and were conferring with each other when they saw him.
"What's the big idea, you crazy spacehead?"
shouted one of them, the first one that he had spoken to on the holo receiver. The others looked at him accusingly. Hey, I didn't put that soul well there just so I could skim you guys across it. If we hadn't rescued them, they'd have been sucked right in, Yale rebuked.
Whoever's stupid enough to get sucked into a soul well deserves it, if you ask me,
asserted one of the individuals, a younger man. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell just behind Yale. Yale saw the expressions on the colonists' faces shift from anger to a startled fear before he turned around and looked up into the eyes of the tall blond man. He was at least 7 feet tall and looked down with a perfectly calm and neutral expression at the group before him. While I do not agree with the assessment of whether we should be deserving of such a fate, I do deeply apologize for the extraordinary inconvenience and strain we have caused, he said, and bowed slightly. I thank you from the very depths of my being for your bravery and excellent response procedure in rescuing me and my companions. Now that he was up close, Yale could tell that the body in front of him was almost certainly artificial, as it was just a little too perfect to be natural. But there was a serious presence that gave the impression of a real living being. My name is Taril. He reached out to shake Yale's hand, a gesture which Yale returned. In the man's hand, Yale felt the distinct feeling of synth skin wrapped around a metal endoskeleton, but without the typical accompanying coldness. I'm Yale Karras, captain of the Red Naga. My ship soul is Chaya, who will shortly be taking us to Zuro. We'll be stopping there for drop-off. We're already a bit over capacity right now, so I am afraid we're out of seats. The captain in Yale shifted stance, and he tilted his head. I would like to know who you are and why you were out here, but first I have to check on the rest of the passengers. Please wait on the bridge. I'll be back up in a moment. I am happy to answer all your questions, said Taril, who turned and stepped into the bridge, looking around at the various holo viewers and screens, while Yale turned back to the passengers behind him. They all seemed to have become far more docile now that Taril's presence had passed over them, so Yale motioned them to return to their rooms, to which they complied. Yale went down the stairway and checked on the passengers in the cargo hold, who were largely gathered around the 6 other 7-foot-tall passengers. It looked like there was a question-and-answer session going on already in there, and so Yale determined they had been similarly pacified. He returned upstairs and went to settle into his captain's chair. He looked at the viewer, saw they had moved quite far from the anomaly, and then looked at Taril, who appeared to be a bit too large for the chair he was sitting in. Chaya, how long until we shift for transit? Yale asked, noticing that the negative emotional vibe had been suppressed.
1 minute and 50 seconds, Captain.
Her ghostly tone echoed in the bridge. I think we can shift into transit now. Everyone seems to have calmed down.
Very well, Captain,
she replied. Then throughout the ship she announced,
We will now be underway. Please take your seats or otherwise secure yourselves.
She waited a moment and followed with,
Shifting phase for transit in 3, 2, 1,
and the ship re-entered the metaphasic state. The psychokinetic pressure increased, and Yale saw their velocity climb to 60 light-years per hour. Not uncomfortable in this ship, but still fast. Seemed she really wanted to get out of this region. Yale looked over to Taril, who had become a bit peculiar. Yale could see a slight aura around him, and his eyes were shimmering. He noticed that Taril had also begun to move in a much more natural way. The robotic patterns had disappeared entirely, and he seemed to be breathing.
A click in Yale's memory informed him that he hadn't seen Taril breathe earlier. "So, Mr. Taril, I can see you're not an average spacer. What are you, if I may ask?"
"You have keen sight, Captain Karras. I am a pilgrim,"
Taril calmly stated. He didn't just look more natural, he sounded more natural as well. His voice was warmer, and his speech patterns no longer matched the monotone he'd started with. "A pilgrim? What kind of pilgrim?" Yale asked. He looked Taril over. Taril was wearing a dark gray one-piece suit, very plain. His boots were also gray, and had no defined patterns in them. Only his hands, neck, and head were uncovered. The material seemed to be a very matte and non-reflective tight-weave fabric. The suit was either extremely cheap or extremely expensive high fashion.
"My companions and I are on the Eternity Pilgrimage. We are on a journey to personally visit every star in the universe and pay homage to it."
Yale almost fell out of his chair. The mere scale of that idea! "That would take forever," he remarked aloud, as the thought boiled over into his speech. A psychic shift in the area gave indication of Chaya's attention focusing onto their guest as well. Curious energy tingled just at the edge of perception.
"Yes,"
Taril replied, a slight smile on his face.
"It may very well take forever. It wouldn't be called the Eternity Pilgrimage otherwise. My only regret is that many stars will burn out long before we could ever reach them."
"Well, yeah, you can't really avoid that, given how much time." "Wow." Yale shook his head and then looked into Taril's shimmering eyes. "What are you? I mean bodily speaking. I can tell you're not just an android with a micro-psi array embedded in your frame."
"I am,"
Taril placed his hand on his chest for emphasis,
"formerly human. I, as well as each of my companions, have had our souls separated from our flesh and embedded in a spirit circuit matrix, contained within and interfacing with these mechanical physical forms. As for the design,"
Taril motioned to his face and hair,
"the creator of these forms had a certain type of aesthetic preference that was embedded in all his work that we were willing to accept as part of the transaction. I have grown into it, so to speak, despite its deviations from the skin of my previous birth."
Yale nodded, the understanding clicking in with his memories. This kind of thing was not entirely unheard of, but it was relatively uncommon. He'd ferried scions, sorcerers, and summoners of all kinds before. Psychics almost always preferred riding in souled ships over others. And even a few spirits, both free and bound. Normally, however, a bound spirit is bound to a living entity. And even a free spirit prefers at least keeping a line on a living person during space travel. A person-sized spirit matrix, though.
"That must have been expensive,"
stated Yale flatly. The slow smile that crawled up Taril's lips into such a deep grin was almost a little scary, until he said,
"Why, yes, it was. It cost me an arm and a leg, and then everything else, too."
He then began to laugh, first in a deep, slow chuckle that then rose up into a higher and faster cackle as he closed his eyes and threw his head back, like this was the funniest thing in the world. Yale couldn't help but laugh with him, not just at the joke itself, but at the raw incongruity of Taril's strange demeanor and presentation set against the joke's straightforward simplicity. Even the colonist still residing in the other seat was carried along in the waves of laughter. The laughter died down after a time, but left a brevity hanging in the air that helped lighten the formerly heavy mood. All right, you got me there. So, Mr. Taril, next question." Yale looked him in the shimmering eyes. "How exactly did you get caught in that soul well with the drive snap?" The smile on Taril's face relaxed, but maintained its presence.
"Well, Captain Karras, we were on our way to the Earlion Star Nursery when our pilot, Coriel, felt a strange vibration through our psi array. On a hunch, he dropped us into standard phase, and we scanned the area. There were several bands of radiation being emitted from a position about 10,000 kilometers from our dropout location, including radio waves, microwaves, and visible light. We moved our ship towards the point to investigate. And when we were much closer, it appeared that a single point in space was emitting long tendrils of light and radiation that were encased in a membrane of electromagnetic fields. One of these light tendrils passed over our ship, and when it did, there was a crack. We felt it in our souls, and it even registered as physically audible. Perhaps if we were still in our flesh, it would have rendered all of us on the ship unconscious. When we looked at the point again, the tendrils were gone, and a soul well had emerged. We were at the very edge of its area of effect. We knew that this was an important discovery, as soul well formation has never been properly recorded until now. We elected to stay and continue observing for a time to take in as much data as we could into our ship's recorder. That was 2 days ago. Today, not long after your ship graced us with its presence as you brushed up against the well, the effect radius suddenly expanded until it encompassed our ship, and it emitted a pulse, not unlike the one we just experienced a moment ago, but much stronger. The combined strain of the well's pull with the pulse caused a resonance in our psi drive that caused its psi crystal matrix to shatter, and with it, much of our ship's psionic energy poured out into the metaphasic. We used the last traces of energy to call out through our psi emitter, hoping perhaps you had not gone too far out before you could receive the call. Then we waited and prayed. Yale slowly nodded. I see. That's a pretty bizarre kind of thing to run into. I thought they'd concluded that soul wells have always just sort of been around.
Arriving at Zuro Station in 10 seconds, Chaya broke in, her voice clearly heard along the interior of the ship. Dropping into standard phase in 3, 2, 1. And the sudden waking up sensation of returning to the material realm brought them back to reality. Yale looked over the view screen and took in the sight of Zuro Station once more. As far out as it was quite well developed. A slightly grand way station and trade hub for younger colonies, solar and planetary surveyors, and other explorative types. It was a large diamond-shaped spire with a wide docking ring surrounding its center, with the long emitter antennae protruding from either end. Zuro was in orbit around a fairly barren, Earth-sized planet that was not particularly habitable due to its occasional acid storms that bleached the planet's surface. But there were several dozen mining operations underground, drawing up mineral deposits to lift to the station to be processed by the station's manufacturing centers. Captain, we are being watched. Feels like Zuro security. I have presented our radio ID sign. Their interest has diminished. A few watchers from the station, Captain. We are being hailed.
Before he could say on screen, Chaya had made the connection and brought up the station dock keeper on the holoviewer.
Welcome back, Red Naga. Didn't I just see you leave? Thought you'd be off to Orlon by now.
The dock keeper was a young woman, and held a bit of snark in her attitude. Sorry, Kelsey, but I'm not out of your hair quite yet. Double order of rescues today, dropping them off here. Thought I might get lunch while I'm at it.
Rescues? How bad is it out there that they'd have you, of all people, rescuing them?
A smug half-smile tugged up Kelsey's cheek. Hey, I'm not that bad. But yeah, it wasn't great for either set. In fact, if it wasn't for me and Chaya, they'd all be stardust by now.
Yeah. Brag about your heroism in the bar, ghosty boy.
Kelsey let out a half-chuckle, and then looked at her own display panels as she keyed in the request.
You're set to dock at Port 7. Lights up. ZD4 out.
The holo connection cut, and Yale could see the landing lights active at the designated location on the docking ring. This has been Chapters 1 and 2 of Tale of the Red Naga. I hope that you've enjoyed this reading of this work. If you have, please let me know. And if you haven't, then please go away and find something else to do. Thank you. See you next time.